broadcast on YouTube, there's always going to be a lag between what happens right now and what is broadcasted on YouTube. But yeah, and you can also watch it afterwards to check if your voice got well recorded
No
on
way.
YouTube.
No way. No
Okay, and I'm starting the recording. So, hello everyone. So this is Lisa, your host today for this fifth episode of the Words of Type Conversation, with five guests joining at each episode. We talk about topics related to typography with a casual and friendly vibe. And these videos are live discussions right now, and they're broadcasted online on our YouTube channel, and they are accessible for free. And at the end of the conversation, we will open the discussion to the members audience. But if you have any question that pops out of your mind during the conversation and you don't want to forget it, you can write it down in the chat window at any time, and I'll ask them during the Q&A session. And if you want, you can also ask your question yourself during the Q&A if we have enough time, and turn on your mic. So today's topic is academic research in typography. Now, let me introduce our guests in the alphabetical order of their last name. And please, while I call you, if you could wave your hand so people can see who you are. So Sofie Beier, you're a type designer and associate professor at the School of Design at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen in Denmark. And you are also the head of the Center of Visibility Design. And Bessemans, you're a legibility expert and award-winning typographic and type designer. You founded the Research Legibility Research Group at the PXL or Pixel MAD School of Arts. Sorry?
BXL, yes.
Yeah, PXL. MAD School of Arts at Hasselt University in Belgium, where you also teach typography and type design. And Gerry Leonidas, you're professor of typography and program director of the Typography and Graphic Communication and Typeface Design Masters of Research at the University of Reading in the UK. Min Young Kim, you're a Korean living in Japan. You're a trilingual typography consultant, a project manager, and researcher specializing in CJK and Latin typography. And after working for and with multiple companies, you are going to pursue on a PhD really soon at Reading. And then Ferdinand Ulrich, you're a typographer and type history researcher based in Berlin, in Germany. You're teaching typography at Salzburg University of Applied Science, and you write about letterforms. And you got your PhD from Reading a couple of years ago, right? In 2023,
That's right.
something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Gerry was my
And
supervisor.
yeah. And we were supposed to have also Eloisa Perez, but she's very sorry because she had a medical visit that has been scheduled very last minute, so she cannot join us today. She's very sorry. Anyway, today I thank you all for joining, and I'm really happy because even if you all have or will have experience regarding academic research, teaching, and studies, you're making here a diverse group of guests from different countries. Some of you have years, if not decades, of experience in academia, and some are quite recent in it as well. So I believe this, it will bring some interesting opinions and things that will be interesting for different people in the audience. Now, like I have a short list of questions. And because we are many here, and I know that we could talk endlessly, please keep in mind that I'll pay attention about timing a little, and it would be nice to have enough time for everyone to talk. And first question, so where is the place of research in typography and its impact on the field? And you might reply whenever you want. It's like it's all free, like I said, casual and friendly.
Well, I can start. I think in my eyes, one of the places of research in typography, at least how we perform it, is at the crucial intersection of artistic design and empirical science. In that sense, for us, it moves a bit beyond traditional intuition-based design practices to a more data-driven approach.
So yeah, I can take over from there. I think Anne and I, we have very much the same approach to research. So we take the outset in the laboratory experiments. And I say for me at least, so my initial motivation for moving into research was that I come from a background in graphic design, in type design, and I have always been very much motivated about producing research that actually feeds back into the community. So coming up with solutions that can help designers in their practice, doing hopefully better work and being better informed about how they can improve their work.
And I think it's also then one of our goals that it can also be implemented into the industries and also target specific reading audiences. For sure, in a constantly changing landscape of reading, where we see more modes of reading popping up and not enough research that has been done from the practical side.
Before we go in any further, I have a little suggestion. Lisa, do you know the spotlight feature on Zoom? You can spotlight only 6 of us, and then the screen will only show the 6 of us, and the other participants can.
Here, like this? Maybe it's just on my screen, no?
There should be spotlight for everyone.
If I do...
If we can't do that, it's okay. It's okay. Just a suggestion. I'll
try to make
when I do a user interview, because I want the user interviewee and the interviewer and the main screen when recording, but it's okay. Since I already opened my mouth to add a little comment to what Anne and Sofie said, I think typography, even though typography is one of the study among usually graphic design, I think it's graphic design and typography are very different in terms of the research approach to research. And not to be controversial, but I think and I believe typography is much more academic and historic, and that's why it's a little bit different from other design areas. It almost feels like it's not an art school major, you know what I mean? Like it's more about knowing the background and building the future rather than more senses or trends and so on. Of course, there is a trend in typography, but I hope you guys can agree some of the. What do you guys think?
Yeah, for sure. I think that typography also can be approached from more an academic point of view. Also, how Gerard Unger always has taught me, like you can never disconnect typography without taking into account the user. And so in that sense, our field, it fosters like interdisciplinary collaborations, approaches. It touches with so many different fields.
I mean, maybe just to expand on the scope of possible typographic research, I think if it's historic research, then it offers a really interesting perspective into areas that have been researched previously. but that look at details of typography that have been overlooked in different disciplines. So I frequently enjoy conversations with colleagues who are researchers in architecture history, for example, or industrial design history, and to sort of spot the intersections that typography can point at in those areas. So I think it just broadens the spectrum of things that have been researched in the past, and comparably, typography research is quite a young discipline in that regard.
Yeah, I think the youngness is a good point. Typography is nothing special. It's exactly at the same stage where, say, sociology was after the Second World War, or linguistics 120 years ago. People are asking, what is the field? What are the limits of the field? What is included or not? And then you can ask questions about what is the field for, or for whom, or what purpose, from which then you can have methodologies. So then the points that Sofie and Anne mentioned, and Min, about user responses or performance of text and so on, are one aspect of this. Another one that might more historical or archival research that Ferdinand mentioned might have more to do with interpretation and narratives and understanding meaning or values through typography and so on. So this is an interesting phase in the last maybe 20 years where typographic research is figuring out what it is, its relationship with other fields. That can be seen a lot through the huge rise in PhDs in typography, and PhDs are very interesting because people have to be very clear in describing what it is that they're trying to do, which is very different from historically self-directed research, which were lone wolf models, people sitting in a cave for 20 years and then writing a book. Scherer, that Anne mentioned, is a very good example of that, but it's not really rigorous in terms of its dialogue with the field. Where someone that says, I do this and these are my limits, these are my methods, and this is the relation of the method to these other disciplines, and that much am I borrowing, say, from architectural discourse or from linguistics discourse, and that is purely typographic method, is something that happens in the first few decades of a field. I think in 50 years' time, well, those of you that will still be around, not me, will be looking at these early decades as periods of actually very interesting debate and discourse on what is typographic research in those exactly institutions that are only the first few generations of producing researchers. The people that we are supervising and Sofie is supervising and Anne is supervising are the first batch of people. And I don't think they are essentially suffering our guesses at this. I think when they themselves become lead researchers or academics in their own right, there's a bit more distance and reflection, and they themselves might be able to have a better understanding or guess at what the field is and its relations. And the main thing to take forward is that exactly because we're exploring these things, none of these interpretations is competing with each other. We are in a field that is quite transdisciplinary or moves towards that direction. At the moment, is mostly multidisciplinary. And understanding the relation of something that is drawing on HCI techniques or something that is drawing on archival techniques or bibliographic techniques is part of this description of a field that has quite a lot of aspects. And in that respect, typography is actually very forward-looking, in the sense that if we look at other fields in the humanities and social sciences, they're coming out of being very narrow silo disciplines into being more multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary fields in their methodology. So in some ways, we are very late in the game. And in some ways, because we are late, we're actually quite ahead of the game.
I think also it has to do with the fact that typography, before it was mainly taught as kind of a field of practice, and also elaborating on what Gerry mentioned, that it's a young field. I think that we are building kind of, how can I say it, kind of knowledge base, because what we can also see within the community is that it establishes and it shares a body of knowledge that is accurate and traceable, for sure, in the case of what Sofie and I do. And then narrative in the more historical approaches, like, for example, from Ferdinand, but I want to believe, and I do believe that based on this, that we are creating kind of a sustainable research program where it transmits or where it ignores like this kind of rather isolated projects, and that one will be building upon knowledge of the others. And that makes it for sure now challenging because it's very difficult to there is not much that we can reflect on what has happened before in the case of what Sofie and I are doing, like so many things that go wrong. So it's like, I think when we are oldies that we can reflect back in a better sense of what we have achieved.
So I think in a way it's interesting that we are talking here. We're meeting here talking about typography research, but in many ways I think that so what we meet around is the topic, but our methodologies are very different. So and then this is also what Gerry is hinting at, that we are a very interdisciplinary field. Also because it's relatively new, so we can basically build on top of what other research fields have already achieved. So the methodologies we can basically adapt from other research fields and then adjust it to our specific situation. And I think that for me that is very, very interesting. And I love the fact that we have historical work, archive work that is completely different from the way I work. We have studies into cultures around typography, different scripts, different sort of approaches in terms of origin also. And then we have the field that I represent that basically steps on top of the natural sciences. So we do lab work, we do statistics, we do analysis and try to sort of find the one big answer, which you cannot do when you do historical work, for example. So this sort of combination of drawing in different research cultures and traditions, I think makes the field very, very interesting. And in that way, it's not a new field because we are building on what others have done before. Sounds like a new field in a way of like in terms of the practice of the research rather than I forgot what I wanted to say. So I think what you're saying is that yes, so the topic might be new, although it's not. Let's not forget that a lot of there's a lot of previous work done also on typography, but the way we work with it today is new because we are now being more systematic and more academic in the approach to working with the field, I think. Do you think that it is more out of realization that there are so many other fields connected to typography, or has it been always there, the connection of typography with, like, as you said, history, sciences, all of that? So there's a long tradition in history within typography, a shorter history within legibility research, I would say.
There's people writing about the performance of letter forms, even for scripts other than Latin, at the beginning of the 20th century. And there's bits that we would recognize perhaps as forms of research similar to what we're doing now, but they're done usually just by a bunch of guys in a Northwest European university with nothing like a methodology we would consider rigorous now. So they're published, but they're full of holes as methodologies, and they're not that many. And our field, I think, has a real challenge when there's only a small number of reference texts. It means that it overemphasizes the importance of things that get repeated again and again in citations. And we see some of that happens in other disciplines as well, that the citation gets repeated, but maybe nobody has gone intently enough to the original source to open it up. And then we realize that actually what doing research was in the 50s or the 60s would not pass a master's dissertation now. They're completely full of holes and biases and extremely partial. So a lot of the research that's being done now, I think, is unpicking previous research, a lot of the assumptions that went into previous ways of doing research. And I'm not even talking about a global environment. Even within the European space, you see whole swathes of geographic Europe being completely absent from the narratives about typographic development. The whole bias for classes. A lot of the historiography is British-based, and it is suffused with class assumptions between the tasks that workers perform and the, let's say, the capital holds, which is a very different kind of reading of practice if you look at a Southern European practice where maybe the idea of organized labor behaved differently, or in countries in Central Europe where, again, the social structures were quite different. But a lot of these English texts, because of the dominance of the English language in book lists and reference, becomes almost a juggernaut that you need actively to pick at and sort of deconstruct and ask questions about, because it already biases a lot of what you're doing. And I say this as someone from a small country where all of the texts were imported English texts, and I'm sure it's the same in many other countries, because that was what was available. And then you grow up with this thing, and it takes an organized environment of critical inquiry, which research environments do, to start asking questions about this. And I think this is a key function of what we're doing now with the research that we're doing in a more rigorous way, and publishing stuff and training the next generation of researchers to ask questions about received wisdom in typography.
I think another interesting aspect is also our ability or the whole task of informing other fields of what we're actually doing. So in my field of research, it's so the sort of a parallel field would be vision science or reading psychology, and still today I meet a lot of colleagues from those fields that do not understand that the typeface actually has an effect of what they're studying. So they just choose a random typeface and then run the experiment on that. So that is still very much unknown outside of design and typography world, that a typeface has an influence on the reading experience. And until others outside of our small community understands that, then we move very slowly forward. So that's also, I think, a big task ahead of us to get out wider to the wider academic community with what we do. And I'm sure it's the same also within the history of typography.
Mm-hmm. Maybe to add upon what Sofie says, what I see with my PhD students is that if they got like external interviews to see if they can get the position, then most of the questions that or one of the questions that are asked to them is either like, what is your most favorite typeface, or what is the best typeface in your eyes? But it's so much more, because it's like, where are you using it? Which size are you using it for? Like, does it involve continuous reading? Are we looking at glance reading? There are so many factors, and it's also, yeah, that I want to elaborate a bit on Sofie. It's like all of these parameters that sometimes the other fields, they are not consciously aware of. And if they would understand that better, that they would, that the impact could be bigger, what we are aiming for.
I might just add one point to typography research being a rather younger discipline, because Gerry just pointed out sort of the this understanding that a lot of what has begun in the 20th century happened in northwest part of Europe, or specifically in England. And I think what's interesting now, and it's one of the advantages of this being rather a younger discipline, is that it operates quite internationally among these places where typographic research is happening. I think when I went to university, I had first heard of the name Walter Tracy when I left university, because Germany has its own Walter Tracys. And so possibly some countries sort of have sort of their own development within the 20th century. And it took quite a while, and maybe until just 20 or 30 years ago, we have a beginning of sort of cross-referencing and things like that. At least that's my perception. And maybe that's also an advantage of this of these programs just sort of mushrooming in different places.
I think that's an interesting point about time scales, because you say 20, 30 years ago, that's when typographic education, other than very few places, was essentially a practical discipline, preparing people for employment as in the graphic arts, graphic design, but with the idea that they had a terminal degree after a 4-year bachelor's or something like this. There are fairly interesting systemic changes that come out of initially the coming together of the European Union, the development of cross-border initiatives like Erasmus that many people have heard of, and now to this initiative, the Bologna process, which was a well-meaning mechanism that Anne and Sofie will probably be tearing their hair out about, of normalizing equivalences of learning experiences, sort of teaching sort of cells and then assessment units and so on. A very good idea to allow, say, a Danish student to take a semester away in Spain and so on, creates a model, a very specific model of education that then, as the digital, let's say, wave tries to produce a new wave of internationally competent students grows, and we see this export of education through franchising, partnerships, and so on, and suddenly you go in the Gulf, for example, or in Southeast Asia, and there are all these universities that are co-developing courses that have been imported wholesale from Europe. What does this mean? They need to import book lists. Because they import essentially a certification system from an entirely alien environment. It's ready to deliver. It gives people something locally, and you can read a lot into this, that sounds like they are buying an international degree. In order to do this quickly, you can't wait to write your own sort of, I don't know, Indonesian native resources. You just translate or import directly the English language resources and so on. So the last 30 years, especially after 2003, we see this growth in exporting models of education that are defined by European models. The Americans are a weird outpost of this simply because of their size, but they're very slowly coming around to changing what education at certain levels. But throughout the world, you see this idea that, oh, these are the levels of education. This is what's expected to do at certain points. Oh, you're doing something that's called a master's. It needs to have some sort of critical inquiry and some engagement with literature. This is what we think this is. And this comes from other disciplines. And then when somebody wants to do a master's in graphic design, their institution will say, oh, it needs to have something that demonstrates critical engagement with the field. How do you do this? So a lot of mechanism of unintended consequences in the last few decades have created a relatively uniform idea of what are certain levels of education at each level. And I think you don't need to think too much about what is a master's in graphic design or in typography and so on, because that's too tightly prescribed. And then the space where you really ask the interesting questions is much higher, is at the PhD level, postdocs and so on, where you really ask the questions about the field. And the stuff further down tends to be much more prescribed, simply because it has been absorbed in a wider tertiary education sector. Sorry, I'm doing the old the old person here, but it's a very interesting process of mapping onto a globalization of the market, of resources, of education models, and our field sort of follows on that wave, and then it makes it possible for me now to go and examine a master's degree in Cairo or in I don't know, in Dubai or in Jakarta, and I know exactly what it's supposed to do.
I think this factor of that you also mentioned, Gerry, that 20 years ago, design education, typography education was aimed at the craft. I think that also has affect what we started out by talking about, that the research field is relatively young. So across the board, institutions have spent many years in becoming academic. And in the beginning, at least from the institution that I represent, the way that they dealt with it in the beginning was that actually to hire people from the university to come in and do design research. And we're still today working towards a shift in saying that people that research typography, that research design, has to have a background within the field, because that way it becomes a different sort of focus area, and it's much easier to actually produce new knowledge that can feed back into the field because we understand the field in a different way. That being said, still, it's very important that we have these interdisciplinary collaborations, that we are not like sort of closing around ourselves, only saying that you need to be a practitioner to be able to work in this field. I don't think so. I think it's very important that we do still collaborate. But that said, we need people with the background also to have the right questions, research questions, and then also making sure that they do the results feed back into the community and the students.
Yeah. Well, I can continue with another question. Now that we have spoken about what you do with research and during the research, maybe if we step back a little and wonder like what kind of a career path is expected once you have a PhD, like what kind of jobs you might hope to have once you have this sesame, this diploma.
Actually, this question was
Professor, might be a professor in a university. That's maybe the most common kind of position, I guess. Are there any other, like, have you seen any other of your PhD students before going to other path than being a professor at a university?
This question was actually from me to Lisa. Since we're all here, I wanted to talk about it, and I'm actually a little bit nervous to be here because I'm the only to be PhD student, and everyone is a professor or graduated from PhD. So this is one of the biggest question I have, and that's why Ferdinand and I had a separate Zoom discussion for this. And I've been talking with a lot of PhD students and graduates, and most of those people actually went into the academia. First, because it's easy to start the academic career path after spending such a long years of such a deep study. And second is it's always good to have some stability in work. And I think all of the freelancers would agree that even if it's just a part-time lecturer, it's good to have a continuous project going on at school. So that's the two reasons I heard. But do you guys have any other archives that be helpful?
I'm still awaiting the first PhD students to defend. What I can talk about is I also have this connected reading type and typography master where we are working into the research lines of research where they are or where they come with this explicit interest in practical legibility research. And what I do notice, people coming from different corners of the world, that they are, how I describe them, like hybrid profiles, really eager to work interdisciplinary, to do research, where they sometimes even come from design studios, but where they are not happy. And I also see it now with students that are graduated from the master and they are enrolling into good design studios actually, but they are reaching out to me, like emailing, like, this is not what I want. I'm eager to research more. And there I think that the industry also needs to, and that connects with the issue that we explained before, the industry not knowing yet all of the factors what typography can do, but having more design studios that work interdisciplinary. We are trying to set something up with the Data Science Institute where companies can reach out and they want to have, they have a specific reading issue. And so they can consult, not only consult on statistics and on testing, but also on designing. That's definitely a place where they would be happy, I think, because then it's connected. And then the other thing, what I see now as, as two, and there are probably more, is like working for industries like Microsoft, because they are, the advanced reading technologies team, where they are into legibility issues, where they are really looking for those hybrid profiles, and also Google that is dealing with font engineering and and on the research aspect of typography. So that's a bit, it's not, how can I say, a straight line yet where they would be, or would have jobs,
I completely agree that sort of the natural direction is to move into academia, but obviously academia cannot not take in all the world's PhD students, and also it's not supposed to. So sort of on a societal level, the idea about behind the PhD is also to feed back into the industry, and hopefully people that have a PhD with them, they can start at a higher level. And I once saw a survey on salary for people at from master level and PhD level, and definitely PhD level, they have a way higher salary level than the master's level. So the industry does understand that people with a PhD has a different perspective and have different views and methods also that can contribute to the company's work.
And I think we need to be a little bit careful at asking what is something for in education. I'm going to be a little bit political because this is a right-wing question. To attach specific goals to the investment that goes into an education experience, a very right-wing way of thinking about something, when you can measure the impact of an investment, which you measure in the money and the time that has gone into it, by predicting what good it will do, for example, a certain career path and so on. And while, especially in some industries, indeed, you might see a measurable difference in the salaries, I think we need to take all the, what Sofie said, the societal dimension, that certain things are good to provide in society, not because you exactly know what they're going to do, but because you're giving the opportunity to people to do things that you cannot predict. And this kind of sort of structured environment where you can push people to develop their critical faculties and to produce new knowledge, which is at the heart of a PhD, and define what this new knowledge is, it's something that feeds back with a multiplier into the society and can have systemic effects in how people see the discipline, how people think about the importance of rigorous testing, for example, when you're developing design solutions and so on. So you could say that a PhD graduate, they might go into industry, but essentially they're a champion for doing typographic research seriously in their specific environment, or they might go into something else that we can maybe imagine now that might be teaching with a more critical level their students, or they're doing something else that we cannot imagine, because this is a smart person pushing themselves a lot. And we have to recognize that in the 3-4 years that they will be doing the PhD, they will come up with things that we are unable to think about. And to provide an environment that is this lossy sort of prediction of what they will do, I think is a much more progressive way of seeing this kind of thing. Shut up, Grant. I'm going to, if I may, I'm going to pick up a question from Ben Sapir-Stein. I've got, he said, what a PhD in typography looks like, which is like a grenade of a question, like if you ask for one. And there's a lot of very different answers to this. Some people have very different ideas about the methodologies or how do you define what new knowledge is essential. And the discipline is the social sciences methodology, the humanities methodology, and answer. What is the balance, or if there is any practice in this, what is practice that is not just doing some stuff? Uh, and what is practice that actually is a methodological response to a valid research question. So it's quite a long debate that you may have. I don't want to answer it because I have my own very strong biases on this, but what I would say is that in the discussion so far of sort of 6 quite well-informed persons, we've had mentioned disciplines like architecture, social sciences, natural sciences, anything that is rigorous and actually has a fairly well-established methodology. Nobody mentioned the art world. And I would say it's a huge misfortune and misconception to think of research in typography as have anything to do with what research happens in the art world. It has much more to do with social sciences, elements of natural sciences, and disciplines like architecture, which might combine engineering, history, culture, human-centered research, and so on. So if you start looking at who offers PhDs and how they describe their PhD, you will see this debate playing out in real time.
Can I add one thing to the question just before that about what is the PhD for? And I listened closely to what Sofie and Anne were saying because the whole idea of a PhD in typographic research isn't nearly as established in Germany, for example. So it doesn't mean anything for a specific academic career boost in that sense. And at the same time, I appreciate what Gerry said. Because I remember when I started the PhD, I was far too excited about the possibility of digging into something that has possibly not been touched before to a certain degree, than sort of ideas of increasing a possible academic salary or anything like that. And although it sounds a bit cheesy, it was really something of a gain that came through a certain experience of a certain process. And I didn't take a break for 3 or 4 years and did nothing but the PhD, but I did it while working on other things. And so it was a really interesting journey to pursue during that time of my career. And so I think that's something to consider in doing a PhD is what it can also bring to daily practice in terms of how you engage with people and the places you visit and where you meet them and how you exchange with them. And I think that's also something that should be a part of our discussion today is sort of the places where we come together to discuss these issues, such as a platform like this one, for example.
Could I add one more? I kept saying, I'm still a student, so it's hard to add my comment to such a wonderful, opinions from everybody. But from my perspective, I think the reason why the academia becomes kind of a natural path of the typography PhDs is I think it also has to do with it being the young discipline because there are not a lot of people who have been studying the typography because it's new. We still need a lot of people in academia to teach more students. I have just started lecturing at my alma mater in Japan, and I kept getting calls from my Korean schools as well because they don't have enough typography teachers, people who can teach typography. I believe all the participants today know that there's a big difference between typography and type design, and it's about to easily put, it's about how we read or how we write, and but it becomes very confusing even in the graphic design field, even among other professors, that they just bring type designers to teach typography or typographers to teach type design, which is not suitable solution, but that's how much it's new, and we need more recognition, not only in the realm but in the world. And because it has to do with how we read and write, it's the fundamental of what makes us humans. So that is why it's connected to other disciplines as well. So I guess that is why a lot of us goes into academia. And honestly thought I would never actually be interested in teaching, but I love it now. I love how I can give back all the knowledge that my teachers gave me to the world. Um,
Yeah,
we're
I
so
suppose that
artistic.
it's a yeah, I suppose that it's because it's a fairly new field as we know it today. Uh, it is even more important to have people who are able to actually teach it consciously and with everything that is happening today everywhere, like cultures merging together because people are ending up sooner or later to use multiple scripts. Yeah, it is ever more important, I would say. Huron says the best thing about teaching is you learn more that way. Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I mean, it's part of life. Yeah. I believe that like since everyone here is from a different country and you've been also you've encountered people from other countries as well, have you seen any difference of methods or perspectives regarding research in typography? Or do you find that everyone has a similar idea of how to handle a PhD research or any research regarding typography?
I'm gonna go first because in Korea and Japan, PhDs are not really dealt well as much as some of the European countries or in the US. So in
Is it because
Korea,
it's new?
PhD,
Sorry. Is it because it's
um,
recent?
I think it's just that PhDs have become a ticket to become a professor rather than the research itself in Korea. So people go and get PhD just because they want to become a professor, which is, I mean, that's a legitimate method for some people, but for us who are serious about the research itself, it might look like the method is being a goal. This is an expression we use in Korea. And in Japan, PhDs overall are not getting enough recognition. So a lot of the PhD grads are losing their jobs or not even being able to get a job. So they end up doing something that is not at all about their major. Just that's the problem in East Asia.
I think when we're talking about PhDs, we also need to recognize that the conditions for a PhD student varies greatly across the globe. Some places you have to finance it yourself, which means that you have to have work on the side. Other places you do get some support, but you're still part of the sort of the student environment. And in other places, again, you are part of the faculty and you're actually a teacher and you get a salary, a teaching salary. So that also means that your ability to dig into your topic and emerge into it also varies depending on your actually living situation.
Yeah, I think this is very right. We cannot ask the question separately of the context for funding and how the local institution and indeed maybe ministries of education or such see it. In a lot of places, and men's description is not unique to South Korea, there's a certain expectations that in order to get appointed, you need to gather certain points. Italy is a good example of this. You get the point by point scoring. your publications or your certificates, and if you've got a PhD, you get 10 more points than someone who's got a master's and 5 publications, and therefore you get the higher. It's a completely nonsensical way, but somebody else might say it's an effort to make it objective, kind of thing. I would say some environments that are a bit older in this, like the British, actually have less anxiety about this. The British are, for all the problems that the British higher education sector is facing now, they are much more flexible in this. They often try to see much more into the content of people's work rather than just scoring little spreadsheets of people's degrees in order to appoint. And indeed, I would not be where I am if I was relying on a point scoring system like there is in Southern Europe. But I think there are also problems in many environments where schools that produce what is still considered a practical discipline are not entitled to award PhDs at all. The terminal degree is considered to be a master's if you're lucky, or some MDes, or an MFA, which is not a very serious research degree on my way of seeing things. And in design schools have to partner with a proper university in order to have the opportunity to award a PhD. And there's many countries where this is happening. And that is nothing that the design schools themselves have any power to change. You really need some sort of political champion at the top who might say, we're going to rethink what design education is and place it within a more conventional higher education environment and allow these people to award PhDs. Because you might say, I've got someone who's producing research, is publishing books, and so on, but I don't trust them to be able to evaluate an independent piece of research. That is an illogical thing. And there are cases where countries have made big changes in this. Portugal is a very good example. In the last 15 years or so, they've completely changed the profile of the people who are teaching design and equipping them with research qualifications. Other countries are beginning to push against this. I think to the degree that I understand the Danish environment, that, Sofie, you might be probably the first doing this kind of work in the Danish environment, which 30 years ago, when I started becoming aware of it, it was much more of a let's train practitioners field. And it seems now, if we're looking at other countries, but these other countries are doing it, and we sort of forget that most countries which can award a PhD now have only been doing it for 15 years. You say, it's all very new. So it doesn't mean that Korea will keep doing it. I think it needs a generational change. I think people who have grown up perhaps, and that's why I made the point about our students becoming leaders in their education fields. People have grown up in a much more interconnected world with much more awareness of how education practice happens in other environments. I think that generation will be much more flexible in rethinking the environments in they're operating, rather than someone who's maybe in their 50s or 60s and carry quite a lot of the 20th century ideas of how education is operating. Of course, I do not count myself amongst those.
There was a comment from Irma about like PhD and what happens afterwards. She says Southeast Europe has the same view on PhD acquisition. Sorry, you get a PhD to secure a professor position, but then yeah, I feel like it's a bit sad that this is the only outcome after you got a PhD diploma. Like, would there be any other path than becoming a professor?
I think if I
I
look
don't
at
know.
my,
Sorry, hold on.
I think if I look at my current PhD candidates, that it's not their wish to become a professor and teach typography. They are really so into the field that they are, at least 2 of them, they are really reaching out like, okay, so my PhD will come to an end. Like Marta is here. Marta is reaching out as she wants to pursue a postdoc, as well as my other PhD candidate, Sabina. So yeah, it's this kind of next trajectory where also it's one of my ambitions that research can grow not only by means of PhD level, but also postdoc level, and prof level, to feed that side more. And what we are trying to do with research, we have 5 active research lines, so we bring it into education. But it becomes more and more harder because of all of the digital landscape, and there is this kind of not that they want to see it wrong, but like there are so many digital possibilities to manipulate letters, to make it more attractive for the industry, to get into motion. So it also becomes a task to guard the fundamentals of type design and not just using filters. But in that sense, we do see that with our students, we are kind of successful. We are giving an experiment, an artifact that deals with legibility, and we ask the students to experiment with it, like not in a nerdy way, but also to show them how much creativity something from another field can have. Yeah.
And we're talking about becoming a professor. We don't know that there's money for a university to hire you to become a professor. You get your PhD and then you just look at it. And everybody I meet in a conference or something will complain about how the funding in the country has been cut, because anything that is not engineering or AI based directly is, I don't know, not going to pay its way. So it's not like universities are hiring people left, right, and center. So in a way, you're doing the PhD often not thinking at all about what will happen after it, but because you really enjoy the challenge of going really deeply in an interesting problem, pushing the limits of the field, and doing something because it's worth doing.
And
And
also because they
yeah,
see it's not finished. It like a PhD, to me, there is an endpoint. There should be an endpoint, but it opens so much more. So that's what these students are really attracted to. Like, I have the feeling my job is not yet done. I also want to do this and this and this. And by means of the training that they had, I truly believe that can become postdoc because they are more efficient, they are more skilled, they can do work faster. But then, the unfortunate thing, it's like it also comes with the funding proposals and trying to get money on board to keep them. Yeah.
Yeah, I have
You know,
heard that there are, yeah, sorry,
oh no, I was just going to add
please.
that I may be wrong, but I think as we talked before, I think Gerry mentioned that typography is more similar to like other areas of discipline like liberal arts or like science or history and so on. And so it's more than art, but because we're in art school and because again, not to be controversial, but a lot of people actually consider art to be, something that's additional. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't you don't need this to live kind of a thing. But actually typography is we need typography to live. Like without typography we can't again read or write. But because of that lack of understanding in the general world, I guess if the PhD graduates again have hard time finding other path than academia. We're having a hard time finding the good clients, I'm guessing.
and there is the impact that has nothing to do with using to make money. This impact that it's hard to a PhD. It's 3 years with someone like me breathing down your neck to do stuff, uh, and it's a lot of hard work. You really push yourself to your limits. We've got 25, 26 PhDs now. Most of them are writing in a second language. Uh, Learning things that they've never thought they would learn before, but they are driven with this discovery of the new. And it might be how do I perform better in a specific text performance specific reading environment, but it also might be things like, does my culture have a history that is typographically relevant that has been suppressed over centuries of colonial practice? Or do existing stories about what has been happening in my region completely eliminate the presence of minorities that this research will produce? There's zero chance that you will actually get a much better salary because you've uncovered the suppression of a minority. But actually, there's a lot of satisfaction in rebalancing perceptions of history or primacy, or fighting a bit against this onslaught of very us versus them narrative that we live in now. And for the oldest amongst us, we live in something that is quite different from maybe what was the way of thinking, say, 30 years ago. But I think now we need to be much more active in establishing the presence, the rights, the outputs of minorities, whether the language minorities or script minorities or demographic minorities, which is reflected often through documents, through texts. And in that very small little piece of work, we can say, we can validate the presence of these people. We can say these people are there and they matter, and they're not sort of pushed away by sort of cultural sort of waves that are trying to make us forget what was present maybe only a few decades ago. And I have to say, the older I get, the more radical I get in these things. I used to be much more lets everyone sort of do their own thing. And I don't think you can let everyone do their own thing. I think you be very active in identifying how minorities exist, how do they define themselves in relation to, opposite, against, in defense of the majority practices. And because typography is so much tied into majoritarian technologies and ways of thinking, and that means Latin-based, Northwestern-based ways of doing things, almost everybody else needs to try much harder to establish themselves. And I think a lot of the training we do helps people build the tools to ask these kind of questions about their own practice, be it in South India, in Sri Lanka, in Southeast Asia, in Chinese minorities, and so on, which is very easily forgotten in this sort of very Latin-based, American-centric culture that we are all swimming in against. Swimming in and against. And I need to be careful how I phrase this. Is this recorded? Oh, okay.
So when you have students who have a broad idea of what they want to research on, and then they realize that there are many different possible paths, would you be here guiding, like, or advising which one to take on, or is it all free? And yeah, what kind of a role do you have with the PhD candidates, the students? Like, it must be hard to not have much biases towards what they do, and leave the students work as well as possible, and at the same time not put in your own opinions in it, or maybe what you would want them to do, and let them do what they want, like children in a way.
I think being a PhD supervisor is basically that, teach the student to make these decisions. I should not make those decisions for them.
We are working with, or we start working with kind of a work plan on which they need to attach work packages. If something is fuzzy, that's no problem. We call it kind of risk management to see how you can come to a conclusion. And to me, at least, it's rather interesting to see how creative they are on levels as knowing immediately, like, oh, this is the trajectory and this will be the result, so that it's more like kind of risky. But I think you are a supervisor, you are a coach, you are a manager. Yeah, you are fulfilling different kinds of roles and to make them develop into the person that they want to be, but also with the yeah, with the rigor and with the integrity that you stand for and that you want to protect. In that sense, I think in how we are trying to deal with it, it's quite healthy. We have free choice of co-supervisors. So in that sense, we have or we have had Kevin Larson. We have now in Arabic legibility, we have Nadine. We had Adriaan van der Weel. We have also Luciano Perondi. So we have kind of very diverse teams, and on a yearly basis, we meet in a group, and we are actually like asking questions, like the student presents the progress. We are very critical. We are trying to push him to the next level. But as a group, we decide upon the quality that he has delivered, if he fulfills that. So in a sense, like it's also how we choose the committee members. I don't want it to be like locally based at only our university, so it's spread all over, and most of the time also the community is involved with interest.
I see this as having two parallel actions, and I'm speaking from an environment where we've been doing these for 50 years, and that's it, we've got like 26 people. On one level, you have walking back from Ben's question, you have a clear idea of what a PhD is, or different formats of PhDs. Then you work backwards in terms of scope and scale and see what training do you need to give people. And a lot of training might be specific for the critical skills they need and so on. It might be contextual because people come from very different backgrounds. You might need to build contextual understanding that's not directly relevant to the PhD, and that is shared across the community. And the community is important because people go through challenging, so you need to foster a sense of community of people who are working together in parallel through different challenges. And then there's a different level, which is the one-to-one or two-to-one relation between supervisors and tutors, and students. And in that case, it's one where showing as much trust and humility as you can towards that person, because they are supposed, as Sofie said, they're supposed to answer the questions themselves. You're not really, you want to be as hands-off as possible in terms of having an opinion, but as present as possible instead of being facilitating and trusting in what they're doing. So it's an exercise in informed humility in a way to help them develop as an independent researcher that will and could well be your colleague, your peer.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I
And
think
Ferdinand is thinking that was my experience when you were asking for review.
No, not at all. But I do want to stress, Gerry made one really important point, and I think that goes for almost all academic institutions, and that is the community aspect. It's really important to be rooted within such a community and to have such a vivid exchange amongst other fellow PhD students, because what's so fascinating is that all of the topics are, I mean, some of them are so far apart, if I think of someone like Ricardo or Borna, but at the same time, there are shared experiences in terms of the struggles that you might go through, or the methodology even, you might share methodologies, but work on two completely different things. And that's a very exciting level, I think. And that's also an element, I think, that is part of this whole PhD experience, which there's a lot of gain in that as well, I think.
Do you have anything else to say before we go on with the Q&A with the audience?
Maybe I'll just add to one thing that Min said earlier. I think that typographers can teach type design, but not the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say that, but I didn't want like type designers to get mad. So
Oh.
Maybe I have a question, like Gerry, with you, a PhD trajectory is 3 years. With us, it's 4 years. Sofie, how is it with you?
3 years.
Also 3 years. Okay.
3-year minimum. Yeah.
Yeah, with us, it's 4 years
and a
minimum.
half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if at any other universities they are shorter or even longer?
I heard US PhDs are so much longer, but
Like how
there's no
You tend to
American.
get funding in US institutions. You tend to get funding and work as a TA for a number of years. Depending on the institution, they might have sort of exams for foundational courses. It's a different funding model for it. So it's a bit different from Europe.
I see.
With us, this trajectory runs over mandates. Mandate is 2 years, and then after one mandate, they need to have a progress report, and if that's approved by the committee, the doctoral committee members, then they can go to the next 2 years.
Maybe I can add that although there are not many design or art schools in Germany that offer PhDs in design, a PhD can take up to 10 years in Germany. And one thing specifically is that students typically do not pay tuition during that time, but they may actually be employed by the university, and they might be in some position within the teaching staff and do the PhD on the side.
Yeah, those positions we don't have anymore. They don't want to support PhDs anymore that are not without a payroll if you finance it yourself. So
yeah, so these positions are typically part-time, and I think they're paid for up to 6 years. Yeah.
That's a really, really long commitment
yeah.
after all your studies and yeah. Wow. So yeah, I think now it's about time to go on with the Q&A. We have 2 questions for now from the audience. So Philippe is asking, since so much research needs funding from non-typographic bodies, and considering typography is a recent field of academic research, how do you justify and explain this field to such bodies? And he's asking this from a more humanistic and historic perspective.
So I think that this goes for all academia, that when you're looking for funding, you need to talk about the impact of your research. And my own experience is that the way forward for that is to see what is actually going on in the world, and where can I sort of tweak my work in that direction. Obviously not completely move it away from what I'm interested in, but just sort of seeing how can I adjust my work in the direction so it makes sense for others as well. And so this is something, if you want to have a career in research and in academia, that's quite an essential part of your work, to try to throughout your work life to get these grants and funding, and that is through understanding what drives the reviewers of the funding agencies.
Is there anyone
It
else?
sounds like it's similar to corporate life. Like if you're working at a corporation or if you're working as a vendor with the corporation, like I do, you always need to persuade the audience how meaningful the project we do is and how what kind of impact, good impact it will make to their investments.
Yeah, that's
Almost like a sales pitch.
yeah, true.
Next question from Irma. Yeah, she says she feels this discussion that could go on and should for a long time, as it's a brilliant topic, I guess. if she can ask one question. So, given your thought exchange at the beginning, you described typography as a young transdisciplinary field that is not yet locked into a single methodology or a narrow track. How can we preserve that openness while still building a shared academic foundation?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who wants to answer it? I feel like Gerry, you want to say something?
I think us being in the first generations of, let's say, research leaders or supervisors, often have a multidisciplinary trajectory into the field. We might have studied design or whatever. I don't know. My first degree was in business. So I think we have this a more open approach to our field, maybe because we've had to be the first ones to ask, oh, what is research about reading performance of typefaces in a Belgian or in a Danish education environment? And nobody has asked this before. So I think our careers prepared us to be a bit more open and maybe ask questions about the relationship to other disciplines. I think the risk will be when we have a more integrated educational practice, then to be able to build this kind of openness in the definition of our professional identities as researchers is something that we will need to think consciously about and actively build it rather than assume that our next generation of PhD candidates who might have studied typography, then did a master's in typography, then do a PhD in typography, will have the same kind of openness. So I think you intentionally need to foster this kind of approach through training, through engaging with literature from other fields, through really opening up questions at the methodological stage. How do you discover what methodologies are appropriate? That's a very good stage relatively early to bring someone face to face with methodologies from architectural discourse, from linguistics, from HCI sectors, and so on.
I think it also heads back to that shared knowledge base, like, yeah, being updated also, like academias with what are the new ideas that are popping up, like how can this serve this kind of sustainable research approach to keep this kind of openness and for sure, yeah, make sure that it doesn't get into something narrow. I think it deserves to be open and approached from different interdisciplinary fields.
Yeah. Sofie, you said that it was a really good question. Do you have anything more to say?
I don't know. I think it's important throughout your career, young or old, to just keep being curious and keep sort of reevaluating the way you approach things. So never just go and repeat, but keep doing new stuff. So yeah.
Then there's another question from France. He asks, is type design practice paying attention to academia? He has to ask because on the ground, things have become more about refinement than theoretical progress. Who wants to answer that?
No, I think we still have a long way to go, but I definitely experienced that throughout the years that I have been in academia, that this has changed in for me, a positive way. I feel that the interest in legibility research is growing in the field. There's still a lot of designers out there that don't necessarily think it's relevant, but well, that's on us to help them understand that.
And the type design field is, if you look at communities of practice, it's one of the most blinkered and short-sighted communities in the creative sector. When we're in the years of the fat cows, until recently. People didn't necessarily need to think too much about the value of research and so on because they could milk certain teats that would actually feed the industry. When the purses get tightened, then they realize that research actually gives you arguments. When you engage with people who don't necessarily need to know or care anything about typeface design, but have a budget for a project that needs to be spent with control of risk and some good reasoning, and then the arguments that research develops become much more relevant. So I think the growing respect for research can be mapped onto the increased saturation of the type design professional say sector, especially in the West, and the need for people to up their game and be more clear in why should anybody spend money on their typefaces rather than somebody else's. And research has been now a way where people can make some more objective arguments, or at least arguments that are heard better by people with projects and money to spend.
Well, are there any other questions? No.
Maybe to add upon Ran's question, I think it's also a fact in how the industry wants to respond to the need of type design into a more academic perspective. Yeah, so that specific results can be implemented. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if any of the larger companies in type design, typography have ever funded any research PhD, like where the outcome could directly help them, or never. Ron says Microsoft has done that a lot. Yeah,
With us,
okay.
yes. But yeah, do we see it as an academia or a type business, like the Advanced Reading Technologies group? Yeah, we collaborated on several projects. Yeah, and I'm immensely thankful because that was also pushing how research could grow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also after some years now that my daughter is in second primary school, she came so proud with her book because the method of theater reading, and it's mentioned like my name and then research, she was so proud. So that's already one thing where it gets implemented, where they use the expressive reading out loud in an educational context.
I heard Monotype used to fund researchers.
Yeah, also
like
Google is doing it, huh?
So when there's a big company behind a PhD project, is there a bias towards the result? Like, is it becoming more as a corporate job, or do they still leave some kind of freedom for the person to do the research?
In my case, they leave freedom. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
Yes.
Yeah, the university would not touch the money if it came with strings.
At least at Reading, maybe.
No, we would. There are very strict rules about taking any money from a company about so that the company could say we want to fund something in this general area, but then they can't really be involved in setting anything that has to do with academic judgment. They could not be involved in
because it's not a commercial project.
Well, because then it jeopardizes the integrity of the academic work.
Yeah.
With consultancy jobs that we can take, then if it's like purely consultant, so with a commercial purpose from the company, then prices are like on the market. If it becomes research and if the company allows us to explore further upon the research, and it becomes like kind of a joint efforts into research, like then the prices drop, because then the university sees it as a healthy way in how to push research and innovation that can go back to the industry. But if it's solely on commercial aspects, then yeah, it's
And Garin was asking a technical question to Gerry, asking if there is a way to access PhD thesis from the University of Reading with full access of all images. And then, yeah, if other people are also interested into that, Gerry, you've put a link, and some have all images, others cannot because the institutions holding the originals do not grant permission for online circulation. So yeah, you can check it out, that link on the
Yeah.
chat.
I should say that's a really sore topic that COVID really messed up.
Oh.
Until COVID, a PhD is a published piece of work for which a hard copy exists. So it's like an out of print book you could think of. It's possible for an outside person to go to an institution and open a book and take copies from. COVID pushed all submissions onto digital only files, but the institution didn't necessarily develop flexible enough mechanism for someone to consult a restricted PDF. So what we have now is we have PhDs with often images missing that are accessible online. There used to be a good system for all British PhDs until the British Library got hacked, 3 years ago or something, and a lot of PhDs are not accessible from that, really hampering the research of many people. So we have this really weird situation where significant work has been done, and a lot of researchers cannot access the latest research that's been done in a lot of institutions. I say it's a real problem also if these resources are based in publicly funded institutions. If my taxes are paying for the upkeep of the British Library, why can't I access freely all the images for research work that my taxes fund? So the French have given a different answer to this. The Austrians have given different answers to this. You go to Gallica, there's a lot of stuff very easily available. I think there's a lot of institutions that are trying to play catch up with image rights that is really holding back research, especially in our field where a lot of historical material that's been scanned is not readily available in other publications. It's either those original documents or it's nowhere.
Yeah, and just to add to that, perhaps, and the German perspective is that you actually have to have the thesis published, even if it is with a small publisher and there's only 200 or 300 copies, but it has to have like an ISBN number. And until that happens, you are merely a Dr. Des, as in designated.
Well, 200 is still quite a lot. I mean, it feels like a lot.
with a micro publisher. Yeah. And there's a lot of those publishers around in Germany, just purely for that.
All right. Well, are there any more questions? No? Yes? All right. Well, then I think we can call it a day, unless all of you have anything more to say, like on the topic or anything. We still have a few more minutes. Irma says, thank you for this incredible thought exchange. And there are other people saying thank you.
Thank you.
Well then, Sofie, Anne, Gerry, Minyoung, and Ferdinand, big thank you for your time and for this nice moment together. I hope that everyone enjoyed it and found it interesting. And if you do, you can also support us by becoming a member if you're not already. And all the details are on the wordsoftype.com website. And the next episode will be in 3 months on December 5th. So stay tuned for more information. And I thank you all. I wish you all a great day or afternoon or evening. We never know.
Thank you for
And
the invite.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you all and see you next time, I hope.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Lisa.